So now it's behaving. Um, to get a chat. Oh, I'm just trying this. Take two. It's streaming and reading. Hero was having some issues with his computer. He hadn't reset it in 6 days. Remember to reset your computer, people. The RAM can only handle so much. So yeah, today, because we have really, really big planter beds, pretty much running from one end of the house to the other, needed to fill them up with dirt this year. So we went to some, what's up? Well, yeah, because, I mean, like, maybe somebody's hanging out. He's just creeping up on me. Staring me down. Should probably go to your stream so I can view chat. One viewer. It's me. No, I don't know. Somebody's here. Unique viewers 49. Lies. Oh, I can be a first chatter on my own stream. Where's the button? First. Ha ha ha. Come on, work. Submit one. Whoa, ha, it's me. I didn't take it. I cheated. Because I know what's happening. I'm here. Yeah, so we got brother-in-law works out at a yard and he's got connections to farmers and stuff. So we went and picked up a dump truck load of half a load of dirt. Well, I guess it's a trailer, drop trailer of dirt and manure. Drop that out in the front parking driveway on the one side. Tomorrow I get to start shoveling the wheelbarrow and rolling it into the planter beds. While the weather is still reasonable, but before I actually need to plant things. Because even though the weather's nice and the grass is starting to grow, it could still snow. And nighttime sometimes drops below freezing, so we can't really plant anything because it'll die. Are the ads finished? No. Still got another 2 minutes. So yeah, did that this morning. Then had a bit of a busy at home afternoon. Just finished making dinner. We did. I made tiny loaves of bread. They're like 2 inches wide and like maybe 2.5 inches tall. So little loaf tins. And then I made French toast out of them. Thought that would be a nice dinner. French toast, bananas, whipping cream, syrup, maple syrup, bacon, and sausages. Everyone seemed to like it. Yay. That was weird. My Twitch just looked weird. Everything went black and it looked like everything moved up to the left, but then it just came back. Whatever. Maybe it was the Amazon Prime ad that's in the bottom being all weird. Sure. We got nothing else going on. So, pardon me. We have read Lilliput, Robin Neg, whatever, to the tall people. And then the final chapter is going to be kind of like a mix of 5 different ones. It's about a little less than half of the book left, so 10, 9, 8. Add countdown. Oh my gosh, I can't stop yawning. I woke up really early today. There we go. Haha, fun noise. Okay, we are going to continue reading Gulliver's Travels by Dean Swift. Oh no, I closed it without the bookmark. Mistakes, there we go. I had one job. Okay. A voyage to Laputa, Balnibarbi, Lugnag, Glubdubdrib, and Japan. That mythical country of Japan. Chapter 1. The author sets out on his third voyage, is taken by pirates, the malice of a Dutchman, his arrival at an island, he is received into Laputa. I had not been at home above 10 days when Captain William Robinson, a Cornishman, commander of the Hopewell, a stout ship of 300 tons, came to my house. I had formerly been surgeon of another ship, where he was master, and a fourth part of owner in a voyage to the Levant. He had always treated me more like a brother than an inferior officer, and hearing of my arrival made me a visit, as I apprehended only out of friendship. For nothing passed more than what is... Oh my gosh. As I apprehended only out of friendship, for nothing passed more than what is usual after long absences. The mic's shadow is on my book. Let's try that better. Absences. But repeating his visits often, expressing his joy to find me in good health, asking whether I were now settled for life, adding that he intended a voyage to the East Indies in 2 months. At last he plainly invited me, though with some apologies, to be surgeon of the ship. That I should have another surgeon under me, besides our 2 mates. That my salary should be double the usual pay, and that having experienced my knowledge in sea affairs to be at least equal to his, he would enter into any engagement to follow my advice as much as if I had a share in the command. He said so many other obliging things that I knew him to be so honest a man that I could not reject his proposal. The thirst I had of seeing the world, notwithstanding my past misfortunes, continuing as violently as ever. The only difference that remained was to persuade my wife, whose consent, however, I at last obtained by the prospect of advantage she proposed to her children. We set out on the 5th day of August, 1706. And arrived at Fort St. George the 11th of April, 1707. We stayed there for 3 weeks to refresh our crew, many of whom were sick. From thence we went to Tonquin, where the captain resolved to continue some time, because many of the goods he intended to buy were not ready, nor could he expect to be dispatched in several months. Therefore, in hopes to defray some of the changes he must be at, he bought a sloop, loaded it with several sorts of goods, wherewith the Tonquinese usually trade to the neighboring islands, and putting 14 men on board, whereof 3 were of the country, he appointed me master of the sloop, and gave me power to traffic while he transacted his affairs at Tonquin. We had not sailed above 3 days when a great storm arising, we were driven 5 days to the north-northeast, and then to east. After which we had fair weather, but were still a pretty strong gale away from the west. Upon the 10th day, we were chased by 2 pirates who soon overtook us. For my sloop was so deeply laden that she sailed very slow, neither were we in a condition to defend ourselves. We were boarded at about the same time by both the pirates, who entered furiously at the head of their men, but finding us all prostrate upon our faces, for I so gave the order, they pinioned us with strong ropes, and setting a guard upon us, went to search the sloop. I observed among them a Dutchman, who seemed to be of some authority, though he was not commander of either ship. He knew us by our countenances to be Englishmen, and jabbing to us in our own language, swore we should be tied back to back and thrown into the sea. I spoke Dutch tolerably well. I told him who we were, and begged him, in consideration of our being Christians and Protestants, of neighboring countries in strict alliance, that he would move the captains to take some pity on us. This inflamed his rage. He repeated his threatenings and turned to his companions, spoke with great vehemence in the Japanese language, as I suppose, often using the word Christian. I can't read that word. Whatever. The largest of the 2 pirate ships was commanded by a Japanese captain who spoke a little Dutch, but very imperfectly. He came up to me, and after several questions, which I answered in great humility, he said that we should not die. I made the captain a very low bow, and then turning to the Dutchman, said I was sorry to find him more mercy in him than in brother Christian, but had soon reason to repent those foolish words. For that malicious reprobate, having often endeavoured in vain to persuade both captains that I might be thrown into the sea, which they would not yield to after the promise made me that I should not die, however, prevailed so far as to have a punishment inflicted on me worse, in all human appearance, than death itself. My men were sent by equal division into both the pirate ships, and my sloop new manned. As to myself, it was determined that I should be set adrift in a small canoe with paddles and a sail and 4 days' provisions, which last the Japanese captain was so kind as to double out of his own stores, and would permit no man to search me. I got down into the canoe, while the Dutchman, standing upon the deck, loaded me with all the curses and injurious terms his language could afford. About an hour before we saw the pirates, I had taken an observation and found we were in the latitude of 46 north and a longitude of 183. When I was at some distance from the pirates, I discovered by my pocket glass several islands to the southeast. I set my sail, the wind being fair, with a design to reach the nearest of these islands, which I made a shift to do in about 3 hours. It was all rocky. However, I got many birds' eggs, and striking fire, I kindled some hearth and dry seaweed, by which I roasted my eggs. I ate no other supper, being resolved to spare my provisions as much as I could. I passed the night under the shelter of a rock, strewing some heath under me, and slept pretty well. The next day I sailed to another island, and thence to the third and fourth, sometimes using my sail, sometimes my paddles. But not to trouble the reader with a particular account of my distresses, let it suffice that on the 5th day I arrived at the last island in my sight, which lay south-southeast to the former. This island was a greater distance than I expected, and I did not reach it in less than 5 hours. I encompassed it almost around before I could find a convenient place to land in, which was a small creek about 3 times the wideness of my canoe. I found the island to be all rocky, only a little intermingled with tufts of grass and sweet-smelling herbs. I took out my small provisions, and after having refreshed myself, I secured the remainder in a cave, whereof there were great numbers. I gathered plenty of eggs upon the rocks, and got a quantity of dry seaweed and parched grass, which I designed to kindle the next day and roast my eggs as well as I could. For I had about me my flint steel watch and burning glass. I lay all night in the cave where I had lodged my provisions. My bed was the same dry grass and seaweed which I intended for fuel. I slept very little, for the disquiet of my mind prevailed over my weariness and kept me awake. I considered how impossible it was to preserve my life in so desolate a place, and how miserable my end must be. Yet I found myself so listless and despondent that I had not the heart to rise, and before I could get spirits enough to creep out of my cave, the day was far advanced. I walked a while among the rocks. The sky was perfectly clear, and the sun so hot that I was forced to turn my face from it, when all of a sudden it became obscure. As I thought in a manner very different from what happens when the interposition of a cloud, I turned back and perceived a vast opaque body between me and the sun, moving forwards towards the island. It seemed to be about 2 miles high and hid the sun 6 or 7 minutes, but I did not observe the air to be much colder or the sky more darkened than if I had stood under the shade of a mountain. As it approached nearer over the place where I was, it appeared to be a firm substance, the bottom flat, smooth, and shining very bright from the reflection of the sea below. I stood upon a height about 200 yards from the shore and saw this vast body descending almost to a parallel with me at less than an English mile distance. I took out my pocket perspective and could plainly discover numbers of people moving up and down the sides of it, which appeared to be sloping, but what those people were doing I was not able to distinguish. The natural love of life gave me some inward motion of joy, and I was ready to entertain a hope that this adventure might in some way or other help to deliver me from the desolate place and condition I was in. But at the same time, the reader can hardly conceive my astonishment to behold an island in the air, inhabited by men who were able, as it should seem, to raise or sink or put it into progressive motion as they pleased. But not being at the same time in a disposition to philosophize about their phenomena, I rather chose to observe what course the island would take, because it seemed for a while to stand still. Yet soon after advanced nearer, and I could see the sides of it encompassed with several gradations of galleries and stairs at certain intervals to distend from one another. In the lowest galley I beheld some people fishing with long angling rods, and others looking on. I waved my cap, for my hat was long since worn out, and my handkerchief towards the island, and upon its nearer approach I called and shouted with my utmost strength of my voice. And then looking circumspectly, I beheld a crowd gathered to that side which was most in my view. I found by their pointing towards me and to each other that they plainly discovered me, although they made no return to my shouting. But I could see 4 or 5 men running in great haste up the stairs to the top of the island, who then disappeared. I happened rightly to conjecture that these were sent for orders to some person of an authority upon this occasion. The number of people increased. In less than half an hour the island was moving and raising in such a manner that the lowest gallery appeared in a parallel of less than 100 yards distance from the highest height where I stood. I then put myself in the most supplicating posture, and stood in the humblest ascent, but received no answer. Those who stood nearest over against me seemed to be persons of distinction, and I supposed by their habit. Distinction, as I supposed by their habit. They conferred earnestly with each other, looking often upon me. At length one of them called out in a clear, polite, smooth dialect, not unlike this in sound of the Italian, and therefore I returned an answer in that language, hoping at least that the cadence might be more agreeable to his ears. Although neither of us understood the other, yet my meaning was easily known, for the people saw the distress I was in. They made signs for me to come down from the rock and to go towards the shore, which I accordingly did, and the flying island being raised to a convenient height, the verge directly over me, a chain was let down from the lowest galley with a seat fastened to the bottom, to which I fixed myself and was drawn up by pulleys. Chapter 2. That was a very short chapter. Did I skip it? Miss a page? Oh. Chapter 2. The humors and dispositions of the Lapitans described. An account of their learning, of the king and his court, the author's reception there, the inhabitants subject to fears and disquietudes, an account of the women. Okay, it's a weird end. At my alighting, I was surrounded by a crowd of people, but those who stood nearest seemed to be of better quality. They beheld me with all of their marks and circumstances of wonder. Neither indeed was I much in their debt. Neither indeed was I much in their debt, having never till then seen a race of mortals so singular in their shapes, habits, and countenances. Their heads were all reclined either to the right or to the left, one of their eyes turned inward, and the other directly up to the zenith. Their outward garments were adorned with the figures of suns, moons, and stars, interwoven with those of fiddles, flutes, harps, trumpets, guitars, harpsichords, and many other instruments of music unknown to us in Europe. I observed here and there many in the habit of servants, with a blow bladder fastened like a flail to the end of a short stick, which they carried in their hands. In each bladder was a small quantity of dried peas or little pebbles, as I was afterwards informed. With these bladders they now and then flapped the mouths and ears of those who stood near them, of which practice I could not then conceive the meaning. It seemed the minds of these people were so taken up with the intense speculations that they can neither speak nor attend to the discourses of others without being roused by some external taction upon the organs of speech and hearing, for which reason those persons who were able to afford it always kept a flapper, the original is Seminole, in their family as one of their domestics, nor even walk about to make visits without him. And the business of this officer is, when 2 or 3 or more persons are in company, gently to strike with his bladder the mouth of him who is to speak, and the right ear of him or them to whom the speaker addresses himself. This flapper is likewise employed diligently to attend his master in his walks, and upon occasion to give him a soft flap in his eyes, because he is always so wrapped up in cogitation that he is in manifest danger of falling down every precipice, and bouncing his head against every post, and in the streets of jostling others or being jostled himself into the kennel. There's a little asterisk. It says, the allusions here is to Sir Isaac Newton, who, fits of abstraction, Swift was accustomed to turn into ridicule. On one occasion, as Swift used to tell, Sir Isaac's servants found him mounted on a ladder and so deeply absorbed in a book which he held in his hand that the summons to dinner could not be conveyed to him till the servant gently shook him. The great philosopher was now in his 84th year, and within a few months of his death. He was therefore no fitting subject even for mild sarcasm, but he had given a certain official support to Wood's odious coppers, an offence which the Dean could not readily forgive. Okay. So, Dean Swift had some, what's the word? What's the terminology? Beef. So Dean Swift had beef with Sir Isaac Newton. It's kind of funny. It is necessary to give the reader this information, without which he would not be without which... Oh, hello, Shiny. On your way to the liquor store. Gonna get some liquor. Hope you're having a good day. Woo woo. 10 streak, woo woo. Streaking. Don't streak to the liquor store. I don't think that's legal. Congrats on being second, says Hero. It is necessary. Keep seeing stuff popping up on the corner, but it's just the ads up top popping up and making the chat wiggle. It is necessary. My goodness. It is necessary to give the reader this information, without which he would be at least somewhat. You get a free ride to the cop shop. But they take your liquor if you do. It's not free then. Actually, do they? It's not technically illegal. It's just illegal to necessarily... Like, I get if you've got, like, contraband, like, illegal substances that they would take it because you're not allowed to have it. But technically, alcohol isn't illegal to take, and taking it... It can be an open container. Oh, okay. I don't know the specifics because I don't drink that much, and I most assuredly don't drink and drive. It can't be, yeah. I think there's like a rule in Canada where it's like, you can't have alcohol within arm's reach or something of the driver. I can't quite remember. So like, you can have it, but it's gotta be like in the back seat or something. Weird rules. It is necessary to give the reader this information, without which he would be at least this is a weird phrasing. Without which he would be at the same loss with me to understand the proceedings of these people, as they conducted me up the stairs to the top of the island, and from thence to the royal palace. While we were ascending, they forgot several times what they were about, and left me to myself, though their memories were again roused by their flappers, for they appeared altogether unmoved by the sight of my foreign habit and countenance, and by the... You can sleep off the sauce in your car if you don't have your keys. There is, I don't know, again, I don't exactly know the laws, but I do know that in certain locations, you're not allowed to fall asleep on the side of the road. Like, there's specific places you can sleep. But a lot of the time, if, for example, you tell the cop that, like, you're a hazard to drive because you're too tired, they usually just let you go. Because, I mean, that's fair. Sleep off yourself. Like, I'm not drinking, I'm drunk, and I'm sleeping. Let me go. Reminds me of that one TikTok clip or whatever. It's like, there was a cop waiting just outside, like, this little strip mall area where there was, like, a bar or whatever. And this vehicle's, like, driving forwards. The cop flicks on their lights because it was, like, one of those shadow cars or whatever. And then the vehicle just slowly backs into the parking lot again. Oh, man. It's like, no, you don't. Altogether unmoved by the sight of my foreign habit and countenance, and by the shouts of the vulgar, whose thoughts and minds were more disengaged. At last we entered the palace, and proceeded into the chamber of presence, where I saw the king seated on his throne, attended on each side by persons of prime quality. Before the throne was a large table filled with globes and spheres and mathematical instruments of all kinds. Oh, live across the street from the neighborhood drive. Common random encounter found on my teeth under table. His Majesty took not the least notice of us, although our entrance was not without sufficient noise, by the concourse of all persons belonging to the court. But he was then deep in a problem, and we attended at least an hour before he could solve it. There stood by him on each side a young page with flaps in their hands, and when they saw he was at leisure, one of them gently struck his mouth, and then the other his right ear, at which he started like one awakened of a sudden, and looking towards me and at the company I was in, recollected the occasion of our coming, whereof he had been informed before. He spoke some words, whereupon immediately a young man with a flap came up to my side and flapped me gently on the right ear. But I made signs, as well as I could, that I had no occasion for such an instrument, which, as I afterwards found, gave His Majesty and the whole court a very mean opinion of my understanding. The king, as far as I could conjecture, asked me several questions, and I addressed myself to him in all the languages I had. When it was found that I could neither understand nor be understood, I was conducted by his order to an apartment in his palace. This prince being distinguished above all his predecessors for his hospitality to strangers, where two servants were appointed to attend me. My dinner was brought, and 4 persons of quality whom I remember. Why is there a comma here? They just got a capitalized M right after a comma. He's my dinner. Sorry. My dinner was brought, and 4 persons of quality, whom I remembered to have seen very near the king's person, did me the honor to dine with me. We had 2 courses of 3 dishes each. In the first course, there was a shoulder of mutton cut into an equilateral triangle, a piece of beef into a rhomboid, and a pudding into a cycloid. Cycloid? The second course was 2 ducks trussed up in the form of fiddles, sausages, and puddings resembling flutes and hautboys, and a breast of veal in the shape of a harp. The servants cut our bread into cones, cylinders, parallelograms, and other mathematical figures. While we were at dinner, I made bold to ask the names of several things in their language, and those noble persons, by the assistance of their flappers, delighted to give me answers, hoping to raise my admiration of their great abilities, if I could be brought to converse with them. I was soon able to call for bread and drink, or whatever else I wanted. After dinner, my company withdrew, and a person was sent. Dude, Gulliver has got some insane memories and ability to learn languages of just whatever. After my dinner, my company withdrew, and a person was sent to me by the king's order, attended by a flapper. He brought with him pen, ink, and paper, and 3 or 4 books, giving me to understand by signs that he was sent to teach me the language. We sat together 4 hours, in which time I wrote down a great number of words in columns, with the translations over against them. I likewise made a shift to learn several short sentences, for my tutor would order one of my servants to fetch something, to turn about, to make a bow, to sit, to stand or walk, and the like. Then I took down the sentence in writing. He showed me also in one of his books the figures of the sun, moon, and the stars, the zodiac, the tropics, and polar circles, together with the denominations of many figures of planes and solids. He gave me the names and descriptions of all the musical instruments and the general terms of art in playing on each of them. After he had left me, I placed all of my words with their interpretations in alphabetical order, and thus, in a few days, by the help of very faithful memory, I got some insight into their language. The word which I interpret the flying or floating island is in the original Laputa, whereof I could never learn the true etymology. Lap, in the old obsolete language, signifies high, and unta, a governor, from which they say by corruption was derived Laputa from La Punta, but I do not approve of this derivation. Oh, congrats, Mally, for being 3rd. Which seems to be a little strained. I ventured to offer that the learned among them a conjecture of my own, that Laputa was quasi-lap oted, lap signifying properly the dancing of the sunbeams in the sea, and oted a wing, which, however, I shall not obtrude, but submit to the judicious reader. Welcome, welcome. Those to whom the king had entrusted me, observing how ill I was clad, offered a tailor to come next morning and take my measures for a suit of clothes. This operator did his office after a different manner from those of his trade in Europe. He first took my altitude by quadrant, and then, with a rule and compass, described the dimensions and outlines of my whole body, all which he entered upon paper, and in 6 days brought my clothes very ill made and quite out of shape, but happening to mistake a figure in the calculation. Asterisk. Scott regards this incident as aimed at Sir Isaac Newton, whose published calculation in the sun's distance from the earth was admitted to be very much in error. His fault, however, was not the philosophers, but the printers, whom at some vital point inadvertently added a cipher. Huh, neat fact. See, it's very possible that Studio Ghibli's Laputa is actually a reference to Gulliver Travels' Laputa. Because again, Gulliver Travels being from the 1700s. But my comfort was that I observed such accidents very frequent and little regarded. During my confinement for want of clothes, and by an indisposition that held me some days longer, I much enlarged my dictionary, and when next I went to court, was able to understand many things the king spoke, and to return him some kind of answers. His Majesty had given orders that the island should move northeast and by east, the vertical point over Lagado, the metropolis of the whole kingdom, below upon the firm earth. It was about 90 leagues distant, and our voyage lasted 4 days and a half. I was not in the least sensible of the progressive motion made in the air by the island. On the second morning, about 11 o'clock, the king himself in person, attended by his nobility, courtiers, and officers, having prepared all of their musical instruments, played on them for 3 hours without intermission, so that I was quite stunned with the noise. Neither could I possibly guess the meaning, so my tutor informed me. He said that the people of their island had their ears adapted to hear the music of the spheres, which always played at certain periods, and the court was now prepared to bear their part in whatever instrument they most excelled. In our journey towards Lagado, the capital city, His Majesty ordered that the island should stop over certain towns and villages from whence he might receive the petitions of his subjects, and to this purpose several pack threads were let down, with some weights at the bottom. On these pack threads the people strung their petitions, which mounted up directly, like the scraps of paper fastened by schoolboys at the end of the string that holds their kite. Sometimes we received wine and victuals from below, which were drawn up by pulleys. The knowledge I had in mathematics gave me great assistance in acquiring their phraseology, which depended much upon that science and music, and in the latter I was not unskilled. Their ideas are perpetually conversant in lines and figures. If they would, for example, praise the beauty of a woman or any other animal, they describe it by rhombs, circles, parallelograms, ellipses, and other geometrical terms, or by words of art drawn from music, needless here to repeat. I observed in the king's kitchen all sorts of mathematical and musical instruments, after the figures of which they cut up the joints that were served at his Majesty's table. Their houses, all very ill built, the walls beveled without one right angle in any apartment, and this defect arises from the contempt they bear to practical geometry, which they despise as vulgar and mechanical. Those instructions they give being too refined for the intellects of their workmen, which occasions perpetual mistakes. That sounds kind of like Gray from Star Wars: Old Republic era. And although they are dexterous enough upon a piece of paper, in the management of the rule, the pencil, and the divider, yet in the common actions and behavior of life, I have not seen a more clumsy, awkward, and unhandy people, nor so slow and perplexed in their conceptions upon all other subjects, except those of mathematics and music. They are very bad reasoners and vehemently given to opposition unless they happen to be of the right opinion, which is seldom the case. Imagination, fancy, and invention they are wholly strangers to, nor have any words in their language by which those ideas can be expressed, the whole compass of their thoughts and mind being shut up within the two forementioned sciences. Most of them, and especially those who deal in the astronomical part, have great faith in judicial astrology, although they are ashamed to own it publicly. But what I chiefly admired and thought altogether unaccountable was the strong disposition I observed in them towards news and politics, perpetually inquiring into public affairs, giving their judgments in matters of state, and passionately disputing every inch of a party opinion. How they convey everything in good green parallel. Stress is white accurate, something intervening in black by sector. Kind of interesting fantasy language. Yeah. Huh. I wonder. Yeah. I have indeed observed the same disposition among most of the mathematicians I have known in Europe, although I could never discover the least analogy between the two sciences, unless those people suppose that because the smallest circle has as many degrees as the largest, therefore the regulation and management of the world requires no more abilities than the handling and turning of a globe. Oof. But I rather take this quality to spring from a very common infirmity of human nature, inclining us to be most curious and conceited in matters where we have least concern, and for which we are least adapted by study or nature. Oof. He's throwing shade. These people are under continual disquietudes, never enjoying a minute's peace of mind, and their disturbances proceed from causes which very little affect the rest of mortals. Their apprehensions arise from several changes they dread in the celestial bodies, for instance, that the earth, by the continual approaches of the sun towards it, must, in course of time, be absorbed or swallowed up. The face of the sun will by degrees be encrusted with its own alluvia, and give no more light to the world, that the earth very narrowly escaped a brush from the tail of the last comet, which would have infallibly reduced it to ashes, and that the next, which they have calculated for 1 in 30 years hence, will probably destroy us. For if, in its perihelion, it should approach within a certain degree of the sun, as by their calculations they have reason to dread, it will receive a degree of heat 10,000 times more intense than that of the red-hot glowing iron, and in its absence from the sun carry a blazing trail 10 to the 100,014 miles long, through which, if the earth should pass at the distance of 100,000 miles from the nucleus or main body of the comet, it must in its passage be set on fire and reduced to ashes. That the sun, daily spending its rays without any nutriment to supply them, will at least be wholly consumed and annihilated, which must be attended with the destruction of this earth and of all the planets that receive their light from it. I mean, that one's accurate, but it's going to be a long ways off. They are so perpetually alarmed with the apprehensions of these and the like impending dangers that they can neither sleep quietly in their beds nor have any relish for the common pleasures or amusements of life. When they meet an acquaintance in the morning, the first question is about the sun's health, how he looked at his setting and rising, and what hopes they have to avoid the stroke of the approaching comet. This conversation they are apt to run into with the same temper that boys discover delighting to hear terrible stories of spirits and hobgoblins, which they greedily listen to and dare not go to bed for fear. Oh, hello. Welcome, Zelm, for being the 4th. The women of their island have abundance of vivacity. They contempt their husbands and are exceedingly fond of strangers, whereof there is always a considerable number from the continent below, attending at court, either upon affairs of the several towns and corporations or their own particular occasions, but are much despised because they want the same endowments. Among these, the ladies chose their gallants, for the husband is always so wrapped in speculation that they may proceed to the greatest familiarities before his face if he be but provided with paper and implements without his flapper at his side. Okay. The wives and daughters lament their confinement to the island, although I think it the most delicious spot of ground in the world, and although they live here in the greatest plenty and magnificence, and are allowed to do whatever they please, they long to see the world and take the diversions of the metropolis, which they are not allowed to do without a particular license from the king, and this is not easy to be obtained, because the people of quality have found by frequent experience how hard it is to persuade their women to return from below. I was told that a great court lady, who had several children, is married to the Prime Minister, the richest subject in the kingdom, a very graceful person, extremely fond of her, and lives in the finest palace of the island, went down to Legado on the pretence of health, there hid herself for several months, till the king sent a warrant to search for her, and she was found in an obscure eating-house, all in rags, having pawned her clothes to maintain an old deformed footman, who beat her every day, and in whose company she was taken, much against her will. And although her husband received her with all possible kindness and without the least reproach, she soon after contrived to steal down again with all her jewels to the same gallant, and has not been heard of since. The hell? This may perhaps pass with the reader rather for a European or English story than for of a country so remote, but he may be pleased to consider that the capricities of womankind are not limited by any climate or nation, and that they are much more uniform than can be easily imagined. Okay. In about a month's time, I had made a tolerable proficiency in their language, and was able to answer most of the king's questions. When I had the honor to attend him, His Majesty discovered not the least curiosity to inquire into the laws, government, history, religion, or manners of the countries where I had been, but confined his questions to the state of mathematics, and received the account I gave him with great contempt and indifference, though often roused by his flapper on each side. Chapter 3. A phenomenon solved by modern philosophy and astronomy, the Laputans' great improvements in the latter, the king's method of suppressing insurrections. I desired leave of this prince to see the curiosities of the island, which he was graciously pleased to grant, and ordered my tutor to attend me. I chiefly wanted to know to what cause in art or nature it owed its several motions, whereof I will now give a philosophical account to the reader. The flying or floating island is exactly circular, its diameter 7,837 yards, or about 4 miles and a half, and consequently contains 10,000 acres. It is 300 yards thick. The bottom, or under surface, which appears to those who view it from below, is one even regular plate of adamant, shooting up to the height of about 200 yards. Above it lie the several minerals in their usual order, and over all of it is a coat of rich mold 10 or 12 feet deep. The declivity of the upper surface from the circumference to the center is the natural cause why all the dews and rains which fall upon the island are conveyed in small rivulets towards the middle, where they are emptied into 4 large basins, each about half a mile in circuit and 200 yards distance from the center. In these basins, the water is continuously exhaled by the sun in the daytime, which effectually prevents their overflowing. Besides, as it is in the power of the monarch to raise the island above the region of clouds and vapors, he can prevent the falling of dew and rain whenever he pleases. The highest clouds cannot rise above 2 miles, as naturalists agree. At least they were never known to do so in that country. At the center of the island there is a chasm about 50 yards in diameter, whence the astronomers descend into the large dome, which is therefore called Landona Gagnol, or the astronomers' cave, situated at the depth of 100 yards beneath the upper surface of the adamant. In this cave are 20 lamps continuously burning, which, from the reflection of the adamant, cast a strong light in every part. The place is stored with a great variety of sextants, quadrants, telescopes, astrolabes. Hold on. Astrolabes? Astrolabes? I'm going to say astrolabes. And the other other astronomical instruments. But the greatest curiosity, upon which the fate of the island depends, is a lodestone of prodigious size, in shape resembling a weaver's shuttle.
It is in length 6 yards, and in the thickest part at least 3 yards over. This magnet is sustained by a very strong axle of adamant passing through its middle, upon which it plays, and is poised so exactly that the weakest hand can turn it. It is hooped round with a hollow cylinder of adamant 4 feet deep, as many thick, and 12 yards in diameter, placed horizontally, and supported by 8 adamantine feet, each 6 yards high. In the middle of the concave side there is a groove 12 inches deep, in which the extremities of the axle are lodged and turned round as there is occasion. This stone cannot be moved from its place by any force, because the hoop and its feet are one continued piece with the body of adamant which constitutes the bottom of the island. By means of this lodestone, the island is made to rise and fall and move from one place to another. For with respect to that part of the earth over which the monarch presides, the stone is endured at one of its sides with an attractive power, and at the other with a repulsive. Upon placing the magnet erect, with its abstracting end towards the earth, the island descends, but when the repelling extremity points downwards, the island mounts directly upwards. When the positions of the stone is oblique, the motion of the island is too. For in this magnet, the forces always act in lines parallel to its direction. By this oblique motion, the island is conveyed to different parts of the monarch's dominions. To explain the manner in its progress, let AB represent... Oh my gosh. I can't escape math. Ah! To explain the manner of its progress, let AB represent a line drawn across the dominions of Balnibarbi. Let the line CD represent the lodestone, of which let D be the repelling end and C the attracting end, and the island being over C. Let the stone be placed in the position CD when its repelling end downward, then the island will be driven upwards obliquely towards D. When it arrived at D, let the stone be turned upon its axis, so the attracting end points towards E, and then the island will be carried obliquely towards E. Or if the stone be again turned upon its axle, till it stands in the position EF, with its repelling points downward, the island will rise obliquely towards F, whereby directing the attracting end towards G, the island may be carried to G, and from G to H by turning the stone, so as to make its repelling extremity point directly downward. And thus, by changing the situation of the stone as often as there is occasion, the island is made to rise and fall by turns in an oblique direction, and by those alternate risings and fallings, the obliquity being not considerable, is conveyed from one part of the dominions to the other. Asterix. A parody of this form of mathematical demonstrations, Swift did not love mathematical science or its professors. Dude, Swift had so many beefs with so many people. He's like, I hate all these people. I'm gonna write a book. I'm gonna insult all of them. This book, Gulliver Travels, is just spite. Not just spite in fancy language. It's like, I hate you. Look how stupid you are. Here, read these things. You think it's funny. Well, I'm insulting you. Anyways. But it must be observed that this island cannot move beyond the extent of the dominions below, nor can it rise above the height of 4 miles, for which the astronomers, who have written large systems concerning the stone, assign the following reason: that the magnetic virtue does not extend beyond the distance of 4 miles, and that the mineral which acts upon the stone in the bowels of the earth, and in the sea about 6 leagues distance from the shore, is not diffused through the whole globe, but terminates with the limit of the king's dominions. And it was easy, from the great advantage of such superior situation, for a prince to bring under his obedience whatever country lay within the attraction of that magnet. When the stone is put parallel to the plane of the horizon, the island stands still, for in that case the extremities of it, being at equal distance from the earth, and act with equal force, the one in drawing downwards, and the other in pushing upwards, and consequently no motion can ensue. The lodestone is under the care of certain astronomers, who from time to time give it such positions as the monarch directs. They spend the greatest part of their lives in observing the celestial bodies, which they do by the assistance of glasses far excelling ours in goodness. For although their largest telescopes do not exceed 3 feet, they magnify much more than those of 100 with us, and show the stars with greater clearness. This advantage has enabled them to extend their discoveries much farther than our astronomers in Europe, for they have made a catalogue of 10,000 fixed stars, whereas the largest of ours does not contain above 1/3 part of that number. They have likewise discovered 2 lesser stars, or satellites, which revolve around Mars, whereof the innermost is distant from the center of the primary planet exactly 3 of his diameters, and the outermost 5. The former revolves in the space of 10 hours, and the latter in 21.5. Anyone feel like fact-checking this stuff? Yeah. Yeah, but I'm just curious, like, at this time when Swift wrote Gulliver's, was that common knowledge? Was he just coincidentally correct? Like, I don't know. He had an astronomer on the inside. Told him things. Oh, are you? Mm-hmm. What's his pub? No way.
About 100 years later, discovered that the 2 moons around Mars was actually
Which revolve around Mars, where the innermost is distant from the center of the primary planet exactly 3 of its diameters, and the outermost 5. So how far are these moons from the planet?
freaking.
Okay, look at the diameter of Mars. What is the diameter of Mars? I gotta check this. This is crazy to me. Hmm. We'll go kilometers. We're gonna rough it to 7,000. So 7,000 kilometers is the diameter. How far away is the first moon? 7.
I can see how the diameters.
It doesn't say how far away the moons are. So that one's not accurate. And the second one? Everybody in the metric system still someone give the measurements in decimeters. Well, I mean, maybe they were supposing that there were planets, but they had no actual factual proof yet. Because it's crazy that he did. I mean, he just could have guessed 2. Hi, Carrie. Welcome to the party. We're critiquing Gulliver Travels. And so apparently in the section of Gulliver Travels where he went to Laputa, he's discussing how they had discovered 2 satellites orbiting Mars. The thing is that the discovery of those 2 moons of Mars, Phobos, and what did you say? Phobos and what? E-I-D Deimos? Phobos and Deimos were discovered in the 18... Oh, thank you. Deimos and Phobos were discovered in the 1800s, whereas Gulliver Travels was published in the 1700s. So, fun. But again, it's possible that for 100 years they had kind of theorized, but they didn't quite have proof that they were in fact satellites, so... I don't know. Cool though, I guess. says, what else is he going about these? The former revolves in the space of 10 hours, and the latter in 21 and a half. Moons discovered in 1877. Book published in 1726. Mercury going to all the I heard Hero 5th typing, but he didn't publish. Oh, you're talking to chat. Okay. I thought you were gonna like give me more facts and stuff. It says the former revolves in the span of 10 hours. Now, I don't know if it means like rotates like on its own axis sort of thing, or if it's talking about how long it takes to orbit Mars. I don't know specifically what he means by revolves. So that the squares of their words. Yeah, you know. Oh, he even says they're relatively close to Mars and move quickly, which actually matches what we know about Phobos and Deimos. You know, I just got curious and Googled the meaning of those names, and it's fear and dread. Oh, Mars, edgy moons. The red planet's super edgy. So that the squares of their periodical times are very nearly in the same proportions with the cubes of their distance from the center of Mars, which evidently shows them to be governed by the same law of gravitation that influences the other heavenly bodies. They have observed 93 different comets and settled their periods with great exactness. If this be true, and they affirm it with great confidence, it is much to be wished that their observations were made public, whereby the theory of comets, which at present is very lame and defective, might be brought to the same perfection as other parts of astronomy. The king would be the most absolute prince in the universe if he could but prevail on his ministry to join with him. These having their estates below on the continent, considering the office of a favorite as a very uncertain tenure, would never consent to the enslaving of their country. Mars is a moth goth all goth confirmed. If any town should engage in rebellion or mutiny, fall into violent factions, or refuse to pay the usual tribute, the king has two methods of reducing them to obedience. The first and the mildest course is by keeping the island hovering over such a town and the lands about it, whereby he can oh my gosh. I mean, that's pretty messed up, but yeah. Whereby he can deprive them of the benefit of the sun and the rain, and consequently afflict the inhabitants with dearth and diseases. If the crime deserve it, they are at the same time pelted from above with great stones, or against which they have no defense but by creeping into cellars or caves, while the roofs of their houses are beaten to pieces. Gosh, but if they still continue obstinate, or offer to raise insurrection, he proceeds to the last remedy by letting the island drop directly upon their heads, which makes a universal destruction of both the houses and men. However, this is an extremity to which the prince is seldom driven. Neither, indeed, is he willing to put it in execution, nor dare his ministers advise him to an action which, as it would render them odious to the people, so it would be a great damage to their own estates, which lie all below. The island is the king's demesne. Yeah, it's pretty messed up. Squeeze. There is still indeed a more weighty reason why the kings of this country, have been always averse from executing so terrible an action unless upon the utmost necessity. For if the town intended to be destroyed should have in it any tall rocks, as it generally falls out in the larger cities, a situation probably chosen at first with a view to prevent such a catastrophe. Or if it is abound in high spires or pillars of stone, a sudden fall might endanger the bottom or surface of the island, which, although it consists, as I have said, of one entire adamant, 200 yards thick, might happen to crack or be too great a shock, or burst by approaching too near the fires from the houses below, as the backs both of iron and stone will often do in our chimneys. Of all this the people are well appraised, and understand how far to carry their oh my gosh, we got a big thing. So fun fact, the 3 Mars diameter would actually be exactly correct for the furthest moon, 20,000 kilometers give or take. The 5 Mars diameter would be too far away, about 34,000. The first one is actually 6 kilometers. The orbit times are pretty close, 10 hours to 7.6, 21.5 hours to 30.3 hours. First being his and the second number being fact. So he just like made up some numbers and was fairly accurate.
Very accurately. Yeah, you're right. This book is basically complete. He's like, screw you! I know stuff!
Screw you, I'm smart. I mean, he's throwing shade at Sir Isaac Newton.
Also carries the fifth.
Yeah, Carrie's 5th. Congrats. Random. Of all this, the people are well appraised and understand how far to carry their obstinacy, there we go, where their liberty or property is concerned, and the king, when he is highest provoked and most determined to press the city to rubbish, orders the island to descend with great gentleness out of a pretense of tenderness to his people, but indeed for fear of breaking the adamantine bottom, in which case it is the opinion of all their philosophers that the lodestone could no longer hold it up, the whole mass would fall to the ground. It's like the Boondock Saints quote, "Fuck you, I know shit."
What's your 1F?
Darn it, Shiny. I used up my F word. By a fundamental law of this realm, neither the king nor either of his 2 elder sons are permitted to leave the island, nor the queen till she has attained a certain age. I've been tricked. Chapter 4. The author leaves Lapita, is conveyed to Balnabarbi, arrives at the metropolis. A description of the metropolis and the country adjoining. The author hospitably received by a great lord, his conversation with that lord. Ad. We have an ad. Oh no. Wait. Gotta wait. We're about a third, 2/3 of the way through the book. I hear foot shuffles.
It's already open.
I guess that means you have to close it.
Oh, I guess so.
Is he confused now? That's very funny. Sparta wanted to go to the window, made Angel come all the way across the house, but the window's already open. So Angel closed it. What's a silly boy? I know. I just read it without thinking.
Oh, I forgot it was Sunday.
It's okay, it doesn't matter, we're on an ad break.
Oh, okay.
We're just vibing.
Okay.
It's all good.
Just hack, and then I opened it again. A little taller. Wanted it wider.
That tells 30 seconds.
That's her helping me sell the no wire bracket systems a bit more.
The what?
The wire bracket. No wire bracket system. For how I hung carpet on the wall. Because he, he's on the wall and he's scratching on it. It has not come out of the wall by his creations. Oh, secure. Like, you do it right once.
Oh, looks like we're back. So, there we go. By a fundamental law of this realm, neither the king nor either of his two elder sons are permitted to leave the island, nor the queen till she had attained a certain age. So, Chapter 4, the author leaves Laputa, is conveyed to Bal Nabarbi, arrives at the metropolis, description of the metropolis and the country adjoining, the author hospitably received by a great lord, his conversation with that lord. Although I cannot say that I was ill-treated in this island, yet I must confess I thought myself too much neglected. Not without some degree of contempt, for neither prince nor people appeared to be curious in any part of knowledge except mathematics and music, wherein I was far their inferior, and upon that account very little regarded. On the other side, after having seen all the curiosities of the island, I was very desirous to leave it, being heartily weary of those people. They were indeed excellent in two sciences for which I have great esteem, and wherein I am not unversed, but at the same time so abstracted and involved in speculation that I never met with such disagreeable companions. I conversed only with women, tradesmen, flappers, and court pages during 2 months of my abode there, by which at last I rendered myself extremely contemptible. Yet these were the only people from whom I could ever receive a reasonable answer. I had obtained by hard study a good degree. Ooh, flappers, yeah. Everybody needs a flapper. I had obtained by hard study a good degree of knowledge in their language. I was weary of being confined to an island where I received so little countenance, and resolved to leave it with the first opportunity. There was a great lord at court, nearly related to the king, for that reason alone treated with respect. He was universally reckoned the most ignorant and stupid person among them. OTC similars off the books. He had performed many eminent services for the crown, had great natural and acquired parts, adorned with integrity and honor, but so ill an ear for music that his detractors reported he had been often known to beat time in the wrong place. Neither could his tutors, without extreme difficulty, teach him to demonstrate the most easy proposition in the mathematics. He was pleased to show me many marks of favor, often did me the honor of a visit, desired to be informal in the affairs of Europe, the laws and customs, the manners and learnings of the several countries where I had traveled. He listened to me with a great attention, and made very wise observations on all I spoke. He had 2 flappers attending him for state, but never made use of them, except at court and in visits of ceremony, and would always command them to withdraw when we were alone together. I entreated this illustrious person to intercede in my behalf with his majesty for leave to depart, which he accordingly did, and he was pleased to tell me with regret, for, indeed, he had made me several offers very advantageous, which, however, I refused, with expressions of the highest acknowledgment. On the 16th of February, I took leave of his majesty in the court. The king made me a present to the value of about 200 pounds English, and my protector, the kingsman, as much more, together with a letter of recommendation to a friend of his at Legado, the metropolis. The island being then hovered over a mountain about 2 miles from it. I was let down from the lowest galley in the same manner as I had been taken up. The continent, as far as it is subject to the monarch and the flying island, passed under the general name of Balnabarbi, and the metropolis, as I said before, is called Legado. I felt some little satisfaction in finding myself on firm ground. I walked to the city without any concern, being clad like one of the natives, and sufficiently instructed to converse with them. I soon found out the person's house to whom was recommended, presented my letter from his friend, the grandee in the island, and was received with much kindness. This great lord, whose name was Minodi, offered me an apartment in his own house, where I continued during my stay and was entertained in a most hospitable manner. The next morning after my arrival, he took me in his chariot to see the town, which is about half the bigness of London. The houses were strangely built, and most of them out of repair. People in the streets walked fast, looked wild, their eyes fixed, and were generally in rags. We passed through one of the town gates, and went about 3 miles into the country, where I saw many labourers working with several sorts of tools in the ground, but was not able to conjecture what they were about. Neither did I observe any expectation either of corn or grass, although the soil appeared to be excellent. I could not forbear admiring at those odd appearances, both in town and country, and I made bold to desire my conductor that he would be pleased to explain to me what could be meant by so many busy heads, hands, and faces, both in the streets and in the fields, because I did not discover any good effects they produced. But, on the contrary, I never knew a soil so unhappily cultivated, houses so ill contrived and so ruinous, or a people whose countenances and habits expressed so much misery and want. This Lord Minodi was a person of the first rank, and had been some years governor of Legado, but by a cabal of ministers was just discharged for inefficiency. However, the king treated him with tenderness, and a well-meaning man, but of low, contemptible understanding. When I gave that free censure of the country and its inhabitants, he made no further answer than by telling me that I had not been long enough among them to form a judgment, and that the different nations of the world had different customs, with other common topics to the same purpose. But when we returned to his palace, he asked me how I liked the building, what absurdities I observed, and what quarrel I had with the dress or looks of his domestics. This he might safely do, because everything about him was magnificent, regular, and polite. I answered that His Excellency's prudence, quality, and fortune had exempted him from those defects which folly and beggary had produced in others. He said that if I would go with him to his country house, about 20 miles distant, where his estate lay, there would be more leisure for this kind of conversation. I told His Excellency that I was entirely at his disposal, and accordingly we set out next morning. During our journey, he made me observe the several methods used by farmers in managing their lands, which to me were wholly unaccountable, for, except in some very few places, I could not discover one ear of corn or blade of grass. But in 3 hours' traveling the scene was wholly altered. We came into a most beautiful country, farmers' houses at small distances, neatly built, and fields enclosed containing vineyards, corn grounds, and meadows. Neither do I remember to have seen a more delightful prospect. His Excellency observed my countenance to clear up. He told me with a sigh that there his estate began, and would continue the same till we should come to his house, that his countrymen ridiculed and despised him for managing his affairs no better, and for setting so ill an example to the kingdom, which, however, was followed by very few, such as were old and wilful and weak like himself. We came at length to the house, which was indeed a noble structure, built accordingly to the best rules of ancient architecture. The fountains, gardens, walks, avenues, and groves were all disposed with exact judgment and taste. I gave due praises to everything I saw, whereof His Excellency took not the least notice till after supper, when, there being no third companion, he told me with a very melancholy air that he doubted he must throw down his house in town and country to rebuild them after the present mode, destroy all his plantations, and cast others into some form of modern usage required, and give the same directions to all of his tenants, unless he would submit to incur the censure of pride, singularity, affectation, ignorance, and perhaps increase his majesty's displeasure that the admiration I appeared to be under would cease or diminish when he had informed me of some particulars which probably I had never heard of at court, the people there being too much taken up in their own speculations to have regard to what passed here below. The sum of his discourse was to this effect: that about 40 years ago, certain persons went up to Lapita, either upon business or diversion, and, after 5 months' countenance, came back with a very little smattering of mathematics, but full of volatile spirit, acquired in that airy region. That these persons, upon their return, began to dislike the management of everything below, and fell into schemes of putting all arts, sciences, languages, and mechanics upon new footing. To this end, they procured a royal patent for erecting an academy of projectors in Legato, and the humor prevailed so strongly among the people that there is not a town of any consequence in the kingdom without such an academy. In these colleges, their professors contrived new rules and methods of agriculture and building, and new instruments and tools for all trades and manufactures, whereby, as they undertake, one man shall do the work of 10, a palace may be built in a week, or of materials so durable as to last forever without repair. All these fruits of the earth shall come to maturity at whatever season we think fit to choose, and increase 100-fold more than they do at present, and innumerable other happy proposals. The only inconvenience is that none of these projects are yet brought to perfection, and in the meantime the whole country lies miserably waste, the houses in ruins, and the people without food or clothes. By all which, instead of being discouraged, they are 50 times more violently bent upon prosecuting their schemes, driven equally on by hope and despair, that as for himself, being not of an enterprising spirit, he was content to go on in the old forms, to live in the house his ancestors had built, and act as they did in every part of life without innovation, that some few other persons of quality and gentry had done in the same, or were looked on with an eye of contempt and ill will as enemies to art, ignorant and ill Commonwealth's men, preferring their own ease and sloth before the general improvements of the country. His lordship added that he would not, by any further particulars, prevent the pleasure I should certainly take in viewing the Grand Academy, whither he was resolved I should go. He only desired me to observe a ruined building upon the side of a mountain, about 3 miles distance, of which he gave me this account: that he had a very convenient mill within half a mile of his house, turned by a current from a large river, and sufficient for his own family as well as a great number of his tenants. That about 7 years ago, a club of those projectors came to him with proposals to destroy this mill and build another on the side of the mountain. On the long ridge whereof a long canal must be cut, for a repository of water to be conveyed up by pipes and engines to supply the mill, because the wind and air upon a height agitated the water, and thereby made it fitter for motion. Because the water, descending down a declivity, returned the mill with half the current of a river, whose course is more upon a level, he said that, being then not very well with the court, and pressed by many of his friends, he complied with the proposal, and after employing 100 men for 2 years, the work miscarried. The projectors went off, laying the blame entirely upon him, railing at him ever since, and putting others upon the same experiment with equal assurances of success as well as equal disappointment. In a few days we came back to town, and His Excellency, considering the bad character he had left in the academy, would not go with me himself, but recommended me to a friend of his to bear me company thither. My lord was pleased to represent me a great admirer of projects, and a person of much curiosity and easy belief, which, indeed, was not without truth, for I had myself been a sort of projector in my younger days. 5. The author permitted to see the Grand Academy of Legato, the academy largely described, the arts wherein the professors employ themselves. This academy is not an entire single building, but a constitution of several houses on both sides of a street, which growing waste was purchased and applied to that use. I was received very kindly by the warden and went for many days to the academy. Every room has in it one or more projectors, and I believe I could not be in fewer than 500 rooms. The first man I saw was of very meager aspect, with sooty hands and face, his hair and beard long, ragged, and singed in several places. His clothes, shirt, and skin were all the same color. He had been 8 years upon a project for extracting sunbeams out of cucumbers, which were to be put in phials hermetically sealed and let out to warm in the air in raw, inclement summers. He told me he did not doubt that in 8 years more he should be able to supply the governor's gardens with sunshine at a reasonable rate, but he complained that his stock was low, and entreated me to give him something as an encouragement to ingenuity, especially since this had been a very dear season for cucumbers. I made him a small present, for my lord had furnished me with money on purpose, because he knew that their practice of begging for all who go to see them. Begging from all those who go to see them. Oh, but he showed up, said something bad, and got booted. Banhammer! I saw another at work to calcine ice into gunpowder, who likewise showed me a treatise he had written concerning the malleability of fire, which he intended to publish. There was a most ingenious architect who has contrived a new method for building houses by beginning at the roof and working downwards to the foundation, which he justified to me by the like practice of those two prudent insects, the bee and the spider. There was a man born blind who had several apprentices in his own condition. Their employment was to mix colors for painters, which their masters taught them to distinguish by feeling and smelling. It was indeed my misfortune to find them at that time not very perfect in their lessons. The professor himself happened to be generally mistaken. This artist is much encouraged and esteemed by the whole fraternity. In another apartment, I was highly pleased with a projector who had found a device of ploughing the ground with hogs to save the charges of ploughs, cattle, and labor. The method is this. In an acre of ground, you bury at 6 inches distance and 8 deep a quantity of acorns, dates, chestnuts, and other mast or vegetables where these animals are fondest. Then you drive 600 of them into the field, where in a few days they will root up the whole ground in search of their food, and make it fit for sowing, at the same time manuring it with their dung. It is true, upon experiment, they found the charge and trouble very great. They had little or no crop. However, it is not doubted that this invention may be capable of great improvement. I went into another room, where the walls and ceilings were all hung round with cobwebs, except a narrow passage for the artist to go in and out. At my entrance, he called aloud to me not to disturb his webs. He lamented the fatal mistake the world had been so long in of using silkworms, while we had such plenty of domestic insects who infinitely excelled the former, because they understood how to weave as well as spin. And he proposed further that thereby employing spiders in the charge of dyeing silks should be wholly saved, whereof I was fully convinced when he showed me a vast number of flies most beautifully colored, wherewith he fed his spiders, assuring us that the webs would be a tincture from them. And as he had them all, and as he had them of all hues, he hoped to fit everybody's fancy as soon as he could find proper food for the flies, of certain gums, oils, and other glutinous matter to give a strength and consistence to the threads. I mean, to be fair, we are researching spiders' silk for some applications because it's stronger than other fibers, but yeah. There was an astronomer who had undertaken to place a sundial upon a great weather clock on the townhouse by adjusting the annual and diurnal motions of the earth and the sun so as to answer and coincide with all accidental turnings of the wind. Yeah, spider silk is 5 times stronger than silk. Yeah. Correction. He's wrong. Lies. 5 times stronger than steel. Yeah. Yeah. You get his. Yeah. I visited many other apartments, but shall not trouble my reader with all the curiosities I observed, being studious of brevity. I had hitherto seen only one side of the academy, the other being appropriated to the advancers of speculative learning, of whom I shall say something when I have mentioned one illustrious person more, who is called among them the universal artist. He told us he had been 30 years employing his thoughts for the improvement of human life. He had 2 large rooms full of wonderful curiosities, and 5 men at work. Some were condensing air into dry, tangible substance by extracting the nitre and letting the aqueous or fluid particles percolate. Others softening marble for pillows and pincushion. Others petrifying the hooves of a living horse to preserve them from foundering. The artist himself was at that time busy upon 2 great designs. The first, to sow land with chaff, wherein he affirmed the true seminal value to be contained, and he demonstrated by several experiments which I was not skilled enough to comprehend. The other was, by a certain composition of gums, minerals, and vegetables, outwardly applied, to prevent the growth of wool upon 2 young lambs, and he hoped in a reasonable time to propagate the breed of naked sheep all over the kingdom. We crossed a walk to the other part of the academy, where I have already said the projectors in speculative learning reside. The first professor I saw with a very large room with 40 pupils about him. After salutation, observing me to look earnestly upon a frame, which took up the greatest part of both the length and breadth of the room, he said perhaps I might wonder to see him employed in a project for improving speculative knowledge by practical and mechanical operations. For the world would soon be sensible of its usefulness. He had flattered himself that a more noble, exalted thought never sprang in any other man's head. Everyone knew how laborious the usual method is of attaining arts and sciences, whereas by his contrivance the most ignorant person at a reasonable charge, with a little bodily labor, might write books in philosophy, poetry, politics, law, mathematics, and theology, without the least assistance from genius or study. He then led me to the frame, about 2 sides whereof all his pupils stood in ranks. It was 20 feet square, placed in the middle of the room. The superficies was composed of several bits of wood about the bigness of a die, but some larger than others. They were all linked together by slender wires. These bits of wood were covered on every square with paper pasted on them. On all these papers were written all the words of their language. There are several modes, tenses, and declinations, but without any order. The professor then desired me to observe where he was going to set his engine at work. Is this the Book of Babel? The pupils, at his command, took each of them hold an iron handle, whereof there were 40 fixed round the edges of the frame. Giving them a sudden turn, the whole disposition of the words was entirely changed. He then commanded 36 of the lads to read the several lines softly as they appeared upon the frame, and where they found 3 or 4 words together that might make part of a sentence, they dictated to the 4 remaining boys, who were scribes. This work was repeated 3 or 4 times, and at every turn the engine was so contrived that the words shifted into new places as the square bits of wood moved upside down. 6 hours a day the young students were employed in this labor, and the professor showed me several volumes in large folio already collected of broken sentences, which he intended to piece together, and out of those rich materials he gave the world a complete body of all arts and sciences, which, however, might be still improved and much expedited if the public would raise a fund for making and employing 500 of such frames in legato, and oblige the manor contribute in common their several collections. He assured me that this invention had employed all his thoughts from his youth, that he had emptied the whole vocabulary into his frame, and made the strictest computation to the general proportions there is in books, between the number of particles, nouns, verbs, and other parts of speech. I made my humblest acknowledgment to this illustrious person for his great communicativeness, and promised if I ever had the good fortune to return to my native country that I would do him justice as the sole inventor of this wonderful machine, to form and contrivance of which I desired leave to delineate on paper. I told him, although it was the custom of our learned in Europe to steal inventions from one another, who had thereby at least this advantage, that it became a controversy which was the right owner. Yet I would take such caution that he should have the honor entire without rival. He just made a chatbot, essentially. Just randomly mix letters together until they make sentences. And then if the sentences are good, pass them on. just essentially just a chatbot. 17th century, or sorry, a 18th century chatbot. Okay. We next went to the School of Languages, where 3 professors sat in consultation upon improving that of their own country. The first project was to shorten discourse by cutting polysyllables into one, leaving out verbs and words split into participles, because in reality all things imaginable are but nouns. Is there a language that they developed where there was, I think this was a Reddit or a Discord language that they were about, people are coming up with new words, and you can't explain the rules. Anyways. The other project was a scheme of entirely abolishing all words whatsoever. And this was urged as a great advantage in point of health as well as brevity, for it is plain that every word we speak is, in some degree, a diminution of our lungs by corrosion, consequently contributes to the shortening of our lives. An expedient was therefore offered, that since words are only names for things, it would be more convenient for all men to carry about them such things as were necessary to express a particular business they are to discourse on. And this invention would certainly have taken place with the great ease as well as health of the subject, if the women, in conjunction with the vulgar and illiterate, had not threatened to raise a rebellion unless they might be allowed the liberty to speak with their tongues after the manner of their forefathers. Such constant, irreconcilable enemies to silence are the common people. However, many of the most learned and wise adhered to the new scheme of expressing themselves by things, which has only this inconvenience attending it, that if a man's business be very great and of various kinds, he must be obliged in proportion to carry a greater bundle of things upon his back, unless he can afford 1 or 2 strong servants to attend him. I have often beheld 2 of these sages almost sinking under the weight of their packs, like peddlers among us, who, when they met in the streets, would lay down their loads upon their sacks and hold conversations for an hour together, then put up their implements, help each other to resume their burdens, and take their leave. For short conversations, a man may carry implements in his pockets and under his arms, although enough to supply him, and in his house he cannot be at a loss. Therefore, the room where company meets who practice this art is full of all things, ready at hand, requisite to furnish matter of this kind of artificial converse. What pen? How about a darn pen and paper? Another great advantage proposed by this invention was that it would serve as a universal language and be understood in all civilized nations, whose goods and utensils are generally of the same kind, or nearly resembling, so that their uses might be easily comprehended. And thus ambassadors would be qualified to treat with foreign princes or ministers of state, whose tongues they were utter strangers. I was at the mathematical school, where the master taught his pupils after a method scarcely imaginable to us in Europe. The proposition and demonstration were fairly written on a thin wafer, with ink composed of cephalic tincture. This the student was to swallow upon a fasting stomach, and for 3 days following eat nothing but bread and water, As the wafer digested, the tincture mounted to his brain, bearing the proposition along with it. But the success had not hereto been answerable, partly by some error in the quantum or composition, and partly by the perverseness of the lads, to whom this bolus is so nauseous that they generally steal aside and discharge it upon upwards before it can operate. Neither have they yet been persuaded to use so long as abstinence as the prescription requires. Abstinence as the prescription requires. They'd puke it up. Two, they wouldn't only eat bread and water. Okay. Chapter 5. A further account of the Academy. The author proposes some improvements which are honorably received. In the School of Political Projectors, I was but ill entertained, the professors appearing, in my judgment, wholly out of their senses, which is a scene that never fails to make me melancholy. These unhappy people were proposing schemes for persuading monarchs to choose favourites upon the score of their wisdom, capacity, and virtue, of teaching ministers to consult the public good, of rewarding merit, great abilities, and eminent services, of instructing princes to know their true interest by placing it upon the foundation with that of their people, of choosing for employments persons qualified to exercise them, with many other wild, impossible chimeras that never entered before into the heart of man to conceive, and confirmed in me the old observation that there is nothing so extravagant and irrational which some philosophers have not maintained for truth. But, however, I shall so far do justice to this part of the Academy as to acknowledge that all of them were not so visionary. There was a most ingenious doctor who seemed to be perfectly versed in the whole nature and system of government. This illustrious person had very usefully employed his studies in finding out effectual remedies for all diseases and corruptions to which the several kinds of public administration are subject, by the vices and infirmities of those who govern, as well as by the licentiousness of those who are to obey. For instance, whereas all writers and reasoners have agreed that there is a strict universal resemblance between the natural and the political body, can there be anything more evident than that the health of both must be preserved and the disease cured by the same prescriptions? It is allowed that senates and other great councils are often troubled with redundant ubulant? I think I should know this. Ebullient? Redundant and ebullient and other percent humors. Peccant? And humors. With many diseases of the head and more of the heart, strong convulsions, with grievous contractions of the nerves and sinews in both hands, but especially the right, with spleen, flatus, vertigos, and deliriums, with scrofulous tremors, full of fetid, purulent matter, with canine appetites and crudeness of digestion, besides many other needles to mention. This doctor therefore proposed that upon the meeting of a senate certain physicians should attend at the 3 first days of their sitting, and at the close of each day's debate feel the pulses of each senator, after which, having maturely considered and consulted upon the nature of the several maladies and the methods of cure, they should on the 4th day return to the Senate House, attended by their apothecaries, stored with proper medicines, and before the members sat, administered to each of them lenitives, aperients, and oh my gosh, these words. So lenitives, aperients, abstersives, corrosives, and restringents. Palliatives, laxatives, gosh. What? Gosh. This word. I'd rather say cephalopods at this point. Cepha. So I got cepha. And then L. Cephalalgics. Cephalalgics? Sorry. C. God, Hero told me to spell it, not spell it, sound it out. Sorry. Cephalalgics. That's only, I got more words to go through. Cepa. You know what? I'm just gonna do this one. I can't read you the best words. This guy, words from the 17th century we don't use anymore. See. There. It's gonna spell the next words. That word. Here's another word. Remedy for the headache. I know, acoustics. These weird ass words. Second one, used to treat jaundice. I'm gonna say all of these now. Anything which promotes the discharge of phlegm, mucus, or an expectorant. Who's John and why did he hate liver so much? What? Medical science. Capable of easing pain or discomfort. That doesn't really help me say them out loud though. My autocorrect hated this word and erased it and put a new word in. Didn't help. Abster. You autocorrect that again. Fifth one is gently moving the bowels. These are weird words. And I got one more. What doesn't help? Oh, what the? Just got thrown a ton of words. Cleansing or detergent effect. Okay. The word, none of these words give me a code. Throw another word at me. Brains mush. To reduce the violence of a disease. The word of today is cephalalgics. Say it with me, children. Cephalalgics. Treats symptoms but doesn't actually cure anything. Excuse of apologies. Okay, let's try finishing this. Using sentences try to palliate his blunder. Acoustics, as the several cases required, and according as these medicines should operate, repeat, alter, or omit them at the next meeting. This project could not be of any great expense to the public, and might, in my poor opinion, be of much use for the dispatch of business in those countries where senates have any share of the legislative power, beget I can say this word. It's a normal word. Unanimity. You're laughing at me. It broke. The word part broke. Not like I'm trying to say like anemone. See? Anemone. Because it looks like anonymity. So unanimity. Darn it! He was laughing at me. Like unanimous and anonymity? Unanimity. Darn it! I give up. Moving on. Shorten debates. Open a few mouths which are now closed, and close as many more which are now open. Curb the petulancy of the youth, and correct the positiveness of the old. Rouse the stupid, and damp the pert. I don't even know what I'm reading anymore. Again, because it is great. I believe in me too. I gave up. Again, because it is a great complaint that the favorites of princes are troubled with short and weak memories. The same doctor proposed that whoever attended a first minister after having told his business with the utmost brevity and in the plainest words, should at his departure give that said minister a tweak by the nose, or a thread of his corns, or lug him thrice by both ears, or pinch his arm black and blue to prevent forgetfulness, and every levee day repeat the same operation till the business were done or absolutely refused. We believe in the me that believes in you. He likewise directed that every senator in the great council of a nation, after he had delivered his opinions and argued in the defense of it, should be obliged to give his vote directly contrary, because if that were done, the result would infallibly terminate in the good of the public. When the parties in a state of are violent, he offered a wonderful contrivance to reconcile them. The method is this: you take 100 leaders of each party, you depose them into couples of such whose heads are nearest. Did I skip a page? Yes. That got really confused. You depose them into couples of such whose heads are nearest, and then I would have read time in my travels. I'm like, that is not a proper sentence. Anyways, you depose them into couples of such whose heads are nearest of a size. Sorry. Then let two nice operators. Okay. Let two nice operators saw off the occiput of each couple at the same time in such a manner that the brains may be equally divided. Let the occipants thus cut off be interchanged, applying each to the head of his opposite partyman. It seems indeed to be a work that requires some exactness, but the professor assured us that if it were dexterously performed, the cure would be infallible. Excuse me, no. He wants to. What is that? What's that? What is it called when they separate the. There's a name for it. And it's treatment, a weird treatment for. Called. Form a. Come on, help me. The frontal lobe piercing. Lobotomy. That's what it's called. The form of lobotomy. Darn it. Swapsies. Equally divided. Let the occipants thus be cut off an inch. Okay, here's the other thing too, is that our main thinking brain, as well as the brain that is in control of our speaking, is our left side, our left hemisphere. So theoretically, if you swapped your right hemispheres with someone else, your personality wouldn't necessarily change. That's concerning. Anyways. I don't think that type of experiment is exactly. Anyways, Curtis that are dexterously performed. For he argued thus, that the two half-brains, being left to debate the matter between themselves within the space of one skull, would soon come to good understanding, and produce that moderation, as well as regularity of thinking, so much to be wished for in the heads of those who imagine they came from the world only to watch and govern in its motion. Two insert thing, one is yappy, the other is quietly plotting revenge. Yes, when I become the dominant brain, I shall remove the non-dominant. And as to the difference of brains in quantity or quality, well, that's why he wanted them in the same sized heads. Your two wolves, both are furry. Gosh. As to the difference of brains in quantity or quality among those who are directors in faction, the doctor assured us from his own knowledge that it was a perfect trifle. I heard a very warm debate between two professors about the most commodious and effectual ways and means of raising money without grieving the subject. The first affirmed the justest method would be to lay a certain tax upon vices and folly, and the sum fixed upon every man to be rated after the fairest manner by a jury of his neighbours. The second was of an opinion directly contrary, to tax those qualities of body and mind for which men chiefly value themselves, the rate being more or less according to the degree of excelling, the decision whereof should be left entirely to their own breasts. That's funny. So one of the dudes says that anybody who has failings, have them taxed, and those around them decide the penance of that. And the other one says that you should say that, yo, this is my best skill, and this is how good I am at it, and I'll be taxed on that. He has the worst takes on Facebook, too, right? Wit, valor, and politeness were likewise proposed to be largely taxed, and collected in the same manner, by every person giving his own word for the quantum of what he possessed. But as to honor, justice, wisdom, honestly, it reminds me of how Greek had done taxes, if I remember correctly. Pretty much the more money they had, they flexed it by paying larger sums of taxes, as opposed to buying wealthy things. It's kind of funny. But as to honor, justice, wisdom, and learning, they should not be taxed at all, because they are qualifications of so singular a kind that no man will either allow them in his neighbor or value them in himself. Weird. The women were proposed to be taxed according. Am I gonna get upset about this again? He's really ragging on women in this chapters. The women were proposed to be taxed according to their beauty and skill in dressing, wherein they had the same privilege with the men to be determined by their own judgment. To keep senators in the interests of the crown, it was proposed that the members should raffle for employments, every man first taking an oath and giving security that he would vote for the court whether he won or not, after which the losers had in their turn the liberty of raffling upon the next vacancy. This hope and expectation would be kept alive. None would complain of broken promises, but impute their disappointments wholly to fortune, whose shoulders are broader and stronger than those of ministry. I've did podcasts. Yeah, ragging in the 1700s. I never. Another professor showed me a large paper of instructions for discharging plots and conspiracies against the government. The whole discourse was written with great acuteness, containing many observations, both curious and useful for politicians, but as I conceived not altogether complete. This I ventured to tell the author, and offered, if he pleased, to supply him with some additions. He received my proposition with more compliance than is usual among writers, especially those of the projecting species, professing he would be glad to receive further information. I told him that in the kingdom of Tribnia, by the natives called Langden, where I had sojourned some time in my travels. This is a long ass sentence. I'm gonna read the asterisks. Why did it get more accurate? Tribnia and Langden are, as it will be noticed, anagrams for Britain and England. Oh my gosh, I feel dumb. Because Tribnia and Langdon are anagrams. You rearrange the letters, you get Britain and England. The author in this account of his own country deals, where did the rest of that go? With the trials of his friend Arterbury, Bishop of Rochester. Arterbury was charged with complicity in Jacobite plots and convicted on evidence somewhat resembling the described in the text. Jeez. Okay. I told him that in the kingdom of Tribnia, by the natives called Langden, where I had sojourned some time in my travels, the bulk of the people consist in a manner wholly of discoverers, witnesses, informers, accusers, prosecutors, evidences, swearers, together with their several subservient and subaltern instruments, all under the colors, conduct, and the pay of ministers of state and their deputies. The plots in that kingdom are usually the workmanship of those persons who desire to raise their own character of profound politicians, to restore new vigor to a crazy administration, to stifle or divert general discontents, to fill their coffers with forfeitures, and raise or sink the opinions of public credit, as either shall best answer their private advantage. It is first agreed and settled among them what suspected person shall be accused of a plot. Then effectual care is taken to secure all their letters and papers and put the owner in chains. These papers are delivered to a set of artists, very dexterous in finding out the mysterious meanings of words, syllables, and letters. For instance, they can decipher a flock of geese to signify a senate, a lame dog, an invader, plague, a standing army, a buzzard, a prime minister, the gout, a high priest, a gibbet, a secretary of state, a sieve, a court lady, a broom, of a revolution, a mousetrap, an employment, a sink, a court, a cap and bells, a favorite, a broken reed, a court of justice, an empty tun, a general, a running sore, the administration. When this method fails, they have two other more effectual, which the learned among them call acrostics and anagrams. First, they can decipher all initial letters into political meanings. Thus, N shall signify plot, B a regiment of horse, L the fleet at sea or secondary. Secondly, by transposing the letters of the alphabet in any suspected paper, they can lay upon the deepest designs of a discontented party, and this is the anagrammatic method. Professor made great acknowledgments for communicating these observations and promised to make honorable mentions of me in his treatise. I saw nothing in this country that could invite me to a longer continuance and began to think of returning home to England. Chapter 6. The author leaves Legato, arrives at I can't do this anymore. Maldonada. No ship ready, he takes a short voyage to Grubdubdrib. His reception by the governor. What? That's what it says.
That's gonna start it up.
Glubdubdrib. The continent of which talk really slowly. I'll just slowly flip through these pages. Why is there a 9 at the bottom of this page? There's a random 9 at the bottom of this page. Like, it's just here. It doesn't... The page counts are at the top. What is... There's just a 9. Oh? Oh, there's a 4 down here. What are these numbers? I've never noticed this before. Is there another one over there? There's a 5. What? 4, 5. Understand. 3. Counting up as the book proceeds. They're not chapters, though. Hey, can you look something up, Hero? Can you figure out what these numbers are? There's no, the book counts up. Like, this sounds dumb, but like, I'm on page, shut up, listen to me. I'm on page 205, okay? I'm on chapter 7. What did numbers be? I'm on chapter 7 on page 205, and at the bottom there's a number 9. And I just want to know why. Right there. And if I go this page, no numbers.
Where's 8?
I think it's further back here somewhere. There's just... Oh! There's an 8. 175, 205. It's just like a number. For some reason. Bro was talking some numerology stuff. The book number, but it's in the middle of the fucking... Oops. In the middle of the thing. This is not the... This one, number 8's not in the middle of it. It's like in the middle of a chapter. So... That it adds up to 42. It counts up, so like it's 1, then 2, then 3, and we got 10 over here. So we get up to 11. 11? Hidden numbers. Everywhere.
Chapter mark.
But why?
Because it's 1700.
So they just randomly shoved numbers at the bottom?
Well, go do your 9 for me. So that's chapter 7. That's me. What the?
That's where I'm confused. There's a 12 over here. And there's chapter 9. But that's a 12. I bet it adds it for you. Because...
But where's 1?
That doesn't help either. There's a list of illustrations. The contents are separated into chapters. And pages.
You're looking for the 1.
let's see if we can get past the introduction. Gulliver's Travels. So, open page. Please. Please. There. Okay, now I'm very confused. That's a 2.
That is a 2. Starts in chapter 1 with page 2.
Gulliver Travels, chapter 1, the very first page, starts with 2. Also, there's a 1 down there. There's just like a little numerical, like Roman numeral 1 right next to the random 2. But this is page 3. This is page 1. Maybe that's supposed to present page 1? But where's number 1? Why is... This is so weird. Is it in the middle of the introduction? This is... Why does the introduction start on page 9? This is...
What does that mean?
I'm so confused. I gotta find... Now I have to find 1. What? Okay, just start. Very, very front of this. So, list of illustrations. This is the Gulliver's Travels Illustrated Nelson. So, the publishing information. List of illustrations. Contents. Introduction. It doesn't even have a 1. It starts with 2. Maybe?
You have to remember this. You know,
I mean, this publication's not that old. This one's like 1960s, so maybe 1950s was actually printed. I don't know. Hey, maybe you can do some math for me. Well, because you have a calculator. Or you can math in your head. I'm not going to be picky. Okay, so I figured out what that 1 on the bottom was. That is in fact 1 because I found where a chapter started on page 161 and they couldn't put it at the top, so they put it on the bottom. So that answers that question. But I have 9. Oh my gosh. I can't find 8 now. Get it. I'm just gonna... Bothering me. I want to know. Can't find any numbers. Ah, found it. Okay. Okay, so I have page 175, right? And I have page 205. What's the difference? 70, right? So, theoretically, if this... Right? No, that's 30. Page 205. Yeah, that's 30. So if I were to go 70 minus 30... 145 should be the next... If it's exactly 30 pages apart, 145 should have the next one. Nope. I don't understand. Because the next one is on 147. Doesn't... Is there a photo in here? Do they not count photos, maybe? No, there's a photo in here. I give up, I don't care. Where was I reading? The mystery of the numbers, you guys figured out. I don't know. Oh, it was on 9, that's right. Oh. This is probably going to be the last chapter I read. Where he leaves Legato. That's a good endpoint. Okay. The continent of which this kingdom is a part extends itself. Good hair. As I have reason to believe, eastward to that unknown tract of America, westward of California, and north of the Pacific Ocean, which is not above 150 miles from Legato, where there is a good port and much commerce with the great island of Lugnag, situated to the northwest about 29 degrees north latitude and 140 longitude. This island of Lugnag stands southeastward of Japan, about 100 leagues distant. There is a strict alliance between the Japanese emperor and the king of Lugnag, which affords frequent opportunities of sailing from one island to the other. I determined therefore to direct my course this way in order to my return to Europe. I hired 2 mules with a guide to show me the way and carry my small baggage. I took leave of my noble protector, who had shown me so much favor and made me a generous present at my departure. My journey was without any accident or adventure worth relating, which I arrived at the port of Maldonada, for so it is called. There is no ship in the harbor bound for Lugnag, nor likely to be for some time. The town is about as large as Portsmouth. I soon fell into some acquaintance, and was very hospitably received. A gentleman of distinction said to me that, since the ships bound for Lugnag could not be ready in less than a month, it might be no disagreeable amusement for me to take a trip to the little island of Glubdubdrib. Stop laughing at me! It says Glubdubdrib! What do you want? About 5 leagues off to the southwest. I'm trying to say it seriously, too. He offered himself and a friend to accompany me, and that I should be provided with a small convenient bark for the voyage. What? Yeah, I gotta say it again. Glubdubdrib, as near as I can interpret the word, signifies the island of sorcerers or magicians. Morty odd names. Yeah. And extremely fruitful. It is governed by the head of a certain tribe who are all magicians. This tribe marries only amongst each other, and the eldest in succession is prince or governor. He has a noble palace and a park of about 3,000 acres, surrounded by a wall of hewn stone 20 feet high. In this park are several small enclosures for cattle, corn, and gardening. The governor and his family are served and attended by domestics of a kind somewhat unusual. By his skill in necromancy, he has a power of calling whom he pleases from the dead and commanding their service for 24 hours. No longer. Nor can he call the same persons up again in less than 3 months, except upon very extraordinary occasions. That's a weird power. When you arrive, it reminds me of that thing that the movie, the Dungeons and Dragons movie, where they're asking the dead questions. When you arrived at the island, which was about 11 in the morning, one of the gentlemen who accompanied me went to the governor and desired admittance for a stranger who came on purpose to have the honor of attending on his highness. This was immediately granted, and we all 3 entered the gate of the palace between 2 rows of guards, armed and dressed after a very antique manner, and something in their countenances that made my flesh creep with a horror I cannot express. We passed through several apartments between servants of the same sort, ranked on each side as before, till we came to the chamber of a presence, where after 3 profound obeisances and a few general questions, we were permitted to sit on 3 stools near the lowest step of His Highness's throne. He understood the language of Balnabarbi, although it was different from that of his island. He desired me to give him some account of my travels, to let me see that I should be treated without ceremony. He dismissed all of his attendants with a turn of his finger, at which, to my great astonishment, they vanished in an instant, like visions in a dream when we awoke of it on a sudden. I could not recover myself in some time, till the governor assured me that I should receive no hurt, and observing my 2 companions to be under no concern, who had been often entertained in the same manner, began to take courage and related to His Highness a short history of my several adventures, yet not without some hesitation, and frequently looking behind me for the place where I had seen those domestic spectres. I had the honor to dine with the governor, where a new set of ghosts served up the meat and waited at table. I now observed myself to be less terrified than I had been in the morning. I stayed till sunset, but humbly desired His Highness to excuse me for not accepting his invitation of lodging in the palace. My two friends and I lay at a private house in town adjoining, which is in the capital of this little island, and the next morning we returned to pay our duty to the governor, as he was pleased to command us. After this manner we coordinated in the island for 10 days, most part of every day with the governor, and at night in our lodging. I soon grew so familiarized with the sight of spirits that after the third or fourth time they gave me no emotion at all, or if I had any apprehensions left, my curiosity prevailed over them. For His Highness the Governor ordered me to call upon whatever persons I would choose to name, and in whatever numbers among all the dead from the beginning of the world to the present time, commanded them to answer any questions I should think of to ask. With this condition, that my questions must be confined within the compass of the times they lived in. And one thing I might depend upon, that they would certainly tell me the truth, for lying was a talent of no use in the lower world. I made my humble acknowledgments to His Highness for so great a favor. We were in a chamber from whence there was a fair prospect into the park, and because my first inclination was to be entertained with the scenes of pomp and magnificence, I desired to see Alexander the Great and the head of his army, just after the battle of Arbela, which, upon a motion of the governor's finger, immediately appeared in a large field under the window where we stood. Alexander was called up into the room. It was with great difficulty I understood his Greek, and had but little of my own. He assured me upon his honor that he was not poisoned, but he died of a bad fever by excessive drinking. Next, I saw Hannibal passing the Alps, who told me he had not a drop of vinegar in his camp. I saw Caesar and Pompey and the head of their troops just ready to engage. I saw the former of his large great triumph. I desired that the Senate of Rome might appear before me in one large chamber, and a modern representative in country view in another. The first seemed to be an assembly of heroes and demigods, the other a knot of peddlers, pickpockets, highwaymen, and bullies. The governor, at my request, gave the sign for Caesar and Brutus to advance towards us. I was struck with a profound veneration at the sight of Brutus, who could easily discover the most consummate virtue, the greatest intrepidity and firmness of mind, and truest love of his country, and general benevolence of mankind in every lineament of his countenance. I observed with much pleasure that these two persons were in good intelligence with each other, and Caesar freely confessed to me that the greatest actions of his own life were not equal by many degrees to the glory of taking it away. I had the honor to have much conversation with Brutus, and was told that his ancestor, Junius Socrates, I'm going to butcher this, Epaminondas, Cato the Younger, Sir Thomas More, and himself were perpetually together, a sextum verite, to which all the ages of the world cannot add a seventh. Among us. Epaminondas. Sus. It would be tedious to trouble the reader with relating what vast number of illustrious persons were called up to gratify that insatiable desire I had to see the world in every period of antiquity placed before me. I chiefly fed mine eyes with beholding the destroyers of tyrants and usurpers, and the restorers of liberty to oppressed and injured nations. But it is impossible to express the satisfaction I received in my own mind after such a manner as to make it a suitable entertainment to the reader. And honestly, it is 11:58, and that's the end of the chapter. I think it's a good calling point for tonight. We'll probably be able to finish this book next Sunday. I appreciate everybody for coming to attend. We will finish off next week probably with Glubdrub, and again the infamous country of Japan. We'll see how much I can read that without having to censor half of it. I don't give high faith to these old books anymore. I hope everyone has a good night's sleep. Thank you for hanging out. Bye bye.